Everyone. So, how many of you, please raise your hand, this isn't a test, it's just, I want to gauge how many acronyms I can use, have been with CNPS for over 5 years. And how many of you are members of Santa Clara Valley chapter that are here tonight? Wow, that's great. And welcome everybody else. All of you in the room, so you understand that CNPS is an organization whose mission is to preserve California's native flora for today and for future generations. And that as an organization we've been around for almost 50 years. It was founded in the East Bay in 1965, and that we now have 33 chapters that span the state. You probably know that. How many understand that there's a headquarters in Sacramento? Okay. Well, I'm going to talk tonight about what goes on in Sacramento in the conservation program and what the conservation program is, because it is more than just 2 of us in Sacramento, 3 of us in Sacramento. It is all of the membership. It starts, conservation at CNPS has always started at the local level, on the ground, with people who live in place and understand the resources around them. Get to know it, they learn about it, they teach others, and they work to protect it in various ways. So, I came on board 4 years ago and started working in Sacramento as the Conservation Program Director. So what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is what the program does. And in a nutshell, you know, CNPS, we learn about plants, plant communities, plant ecology, and how to grow plants. We publish the Fremontia to share what we know with others. We write letters. We write lots and lots of well-founded, well-written letters, sometimes with more vinegar than other times. We write comment letters when needed to about different projects undergoing environmental review. And every chapter publishes a newsletter to tell the membership what's going on, what they can do, and events in their area. These are all things that bring us together, and every once in a while we come together as groups. We have quarterly meetings, the chapter council, and it's, for me, really, these get-togethers are recharge events where people share the experiences that have been going on in their chapters. We do business together, organizational business, and we leave refreshed and recharged and ready to go forth and conserve for the next few weeks. And we put it all together, and it amounts to the work that CNPS does to protect places that we love, that we like to go out to and go walking and listen to the quiet and experience the beauty that we love, and sometimes that we bring into our own backyards. Just a little bit like what we see over here, which is very nice. So I'm going to talk to you about the conservation program. I'm going to categorize the work over the last 4 years into 3 categories and give an example about each of those things, one example of each. But before I do, I want to discuss a little bit about the other programs that CNPS has that you may or may not be aware of. I imagine that most of you are aware, since you are members and have been around for a while. So we have the Rare Plant Program. The Rare Plant Program is led by our rare plant botanist, Aaron Sims, and Aaron maintains the rare plant inventory, which is now online, and you can search the rare plant inventory via our website. So we have a Rare Plant Program. We have the Vegetation Program. The director of the Vegetation Program is Julie Evans, one of the co-authors of the Manual for California Vegetation. The vegetation program goes out and maps and teaches people how to map the plant communities of California. The goal is to have a seamless wall-to-wall vegetation map of California, and right now we're about a third of the way there. So all that we know about the plant communities down to the alliance and the association level, if you understand that classification, it's a very fine-grained way of looking at plant cohorts, can be found and read about in this book. So that's the vegetation program. And the vegetation program has the most staff in Sacramento. At this point, they are out mapping several areas in California. We have an education program that provides curriculum to students, young and old, across California. The curriculum that focuses on observation and journaling is available online for free via the website. And the education program director is Josie Crawford. We have this is the cotyledon of programs at CNPS. It's the new horticulture program that is just starting to get off the ground, where I believe the board of directors and the chapter council are working on putting this program together and eventually hiring a director. Soon.
Soon, I'm informed.
Aha, a voice from the audience. So soon we will have a horticulture director to champion the program. And right now it's mostly a web presence on our website, the horticulture program, with information about what grows in your backyard and where there are nurseries near you. And then there's the conservation program. And that's what I'm the director of. Together with me, I have a conservation committee of 10 volunteers that we meet semi-regularly. I consult with the executive director, and we have a legislative consultant, or lobbyist, Vern Gehring, who works about a third of the time for us, also under the conservation program. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, especially as we get into some of the examples, don't worry, please, we're going to have a back and forth as we go. 3 categories of my work at the conservation program in Sacramento. As a representative of CNPS, I am a conduit between the plant scientists and the natural resource agencies or the local land use authorities that want to do a project that may have impacts to plants. So that's what you do here in the chapters. Many of you in the room here do exactly the same thing within your chapter. The state gets involved when there's an issue that is statewide in scope or is multiple chapters within its geographic area. Then, rather than one chapter taking the lead or the other, if asked or if I come across the project, I'll take the lead and work with the chapters on that kind of a thing. So, the conduit in land use planning for plant science, we advocate legislation that's plant-related, plant conservation-related. Sometimes not only tracking the bills and saying that we oppose or support them, but often also working to modify legislation to improve the tools that all of us use to conserve plant species and communities in California. And lastly, part of my work is to help coordinate and facilitate communication amongst all of us, amongst all 33 chapters. Doing that on a monthly basis, we have these calls, these chapter conservation chair calls, and it's amazing how, whether members are new or they've been working at CNPS for decades, often the issues are the same over and over, but there can be someone in Southern California who's worked on a very similar issue to someone in the Sierra foothills that has a wealth of experience to transfer and to share. And I do my best to try and facilitate that information sharing, and it makes for an organization with a broad base of experience to call upon. So I'm going to talk about all three of these things and give an example of each one as we go. But quickly, a little bit more in depth about what I mean about the conduit between the land use planning and plant science. This manifests itself in comment letters, in sitting around the table as the CNPS representative, and developing partnerships with other organizations like California Audubon, or Audubon National Organization, like Sierra Club, CBD, Center for Biological Diversity, and many other large and small NGOs. There's strength in numbers, basically. And quite often the environmental issues on a project are wide-ranging, and CNPS can be a source for the plants, of course, in that process with other environmental partners. When I talk about advocating and modifying legislation, to track legislation on our website, I'll show you how to get there in just a bit. We have a legislation tracker where you can go, Vern Gehring will, from January through August, which is the legislative session, will look through the hundreds of bills that are proposed, pick out the ones that have some nexus to plant conservation, and post them on this long list on this page. You can read a little bit about it, and find whether we oppose or support them, or we're just watching them. Is there a pointer by any chance? I didn't think of that. Okay, I'll just try and do that without stepping too far out of frame. We draft and modify legislation. I'm going to talk to you about a couple examples of those in a bit, where we actually go in and we'll cross out, or we'll say, well, no, we shouldn't cross this out, and bring it to the legislative staff in Sacramento. That is one advantage of being in Sacramento, is that it's an easy access walk over to the Capitol and to the legislative staff building to talk to legislators, mostly their staff, and explain to them what issues we're concerned about, and go back and forth with them rather easily in terms of geographic space, working on bills. It helps if your local elected officials already know about CNPS. So I know Don, I don't see Don here tonight, but I know Don Mayall is very connected into the political scene with elected officials from this area, and that helps very much sort of grease the wheels. When we walk into an office, they already know what CNPS is about. That helps. And then we campaign with others on bills that hit the floor. So, quite often there'll be emails going around or telephone calls, and we'll join others in support or opposition of a bill in the legislature. And then sharing information through our publications, getting together to share science results. We have monthly conference calls. Every chapter has a website. The state does too. It's definitely something that we could work on, had room for improvement. And then presentations, the different programs give presentations to chapters. So those are the three categories. And the first one that I'd like to talk about is bringing plant science to land use planning at the state level. I'm going to give one example and sort of talk about an issue that I think we've all heard about is large projects in the desert, renewable energy projects. the conundrum of doing something good, having a great idea, but putting it in a bad place and trying to find a better place for it. And so I'll spend a little bit of time here talking to you about putting solar energy, and in some places wind. I won't talk too much about wind tonight. Excuse me. In the desert. How many have taken a trip to the desert and walked out on a hot day out in the desert? So some of you have been there. Or a cold one. Hopefully not a rainy one. Although that can be pretty cool too. So the solar energy projects in the desert, is anyone unfamiliar with this idea of what's happening in California? Actually across the West. And not just in the desert. The issues I'm talking about here and the size of the projects are now translatable anywhere in California that's flat. The wind projects are also anywhere in California, though we are trying to really push them away from ridge tops. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what's going on in the desert. Here's the California Desert Conservation Area. This is an area that was bounded in the 80s, and BLM came up with a big land management plan for this 23 million acre area. So can you see the black outline? And these three forks that come up? This is Owens Valley. And this is the Western Mojave Antelope Valley. This is the San Bernardino Mountains here. San Bernardino National Forest. Los Padres, Angeles National Forest here, and Los Padres. San Bernardino National Forest again comes down here. And the Cleveland National Forest is down here. Here's Mexico. This is Arizona. And that's Nevada. 23 million acres. Much of it, about 75–80% of it, is managed, public lands managed by the Bureau of Land Management, which is very important in this story. Because in 2005, the United States made it a priority to develop renewable energy on public lands by an executive order of the president at the time, 2005. Public lands were opened up for renewable energy. Potentially a good thing. If you're a business owner, it's easier for me to put a big project on public lands because it's one land manager and the price is very cheap. I don't have to try and cobble together many parcels and haggle prices with many landowners to find the space for my project. So that was a super greased wheel right there. Okay. So this is the desert area. You know, the desert is unique in that in California, in that they're wide open, intact, functional ecosystems dominate the 23 million acres. In the Mojave, there's approximately 7% only of the Mojave flora is non-native. It's the lowest non-native percent area in California, possibly in the lower 48. It is largely intact. It's not pristine in all areas. I was out near Blythe the other day. In fact, I'll show you some pictures where General Patton's tanks trained in World War II for the desert. And the tracks are as fresh today as they were, I suppose, back in the 40s. I didn't see them back then. When I saw them, I thought it was someone in a pickup that had been driving around. And then when I zoomed out from an aerial view, I saw how extensive it was, and then I was really discouraged. And then the BLM person I was with told me that this was one of the 3 areas that Patton's tanks were training, and that's what those tracks were. I'm pausing here for just a second because the desert area that I showed earlier, it's interspersed with mountains. And it's areas like this where the mountains shed off this alluvial fan, areas, this Bahada, where the slopes in the desert become less than 3%. 3% or less. Very flattish. And it's very sunny. So that, you know, the desert is some of the sunniest and flattest place in the world, which is a blessing, and now is sort of a curse on the desert, depending on how one looks at it.
Is that Antiborrego?
No, I don't believe it is.
Okay.
I believe this is in the eastern Mojave, but I'm not going to swear by that. But what I wanted to show particularly is this typical area of Bahada. Notice, and is this focused enough? Where I'm standing is a little fuzzy. But can you see the braided channels that run through here on the Bahada?
Yeah.
This is a landscape feature that is at risk. The washes in the desert are largely undervalued and overlooked through the regulatory process today, both at the federal end of identifying what a wash is and which kinds of washes should be protected and what kind of ecological value they represent in this landscape. They harbor a vegetation type and species that are wholly different in ecological value than the upland, predominantly creosote landscape. So I wanted to show you this kind of thing because we're going to spend the next few minutes looking at pictures and movies about those types of areas, the Bahadas, where most of the solar projects are being put in today. So, back to the map. Right now today we have literally hundreds of applications for very large projects, and by very large, I'm talking about 3,000 acres to 12,000 acres per project, per footprint.
That's 5 square miles enough.
I'm going to show you how much that is in just a second, because when I say that, and when we look at these maps, the danger of looking at a map like this is I say, here's the desert area, and every pink area you see in this map, all the pink in that one and all the pink in this one, those are areas that are potentially open for development, where you could put, if you were a company, you could put a solar project. Now, what these maps are maps for a conservation plan that's being developed for the desert. Here in Santa Clara County, you've just completed and christened a Santa Clara Valley Conservation Plan, then HCP, NCCP, if those funny syllable words mean anything to you, the acronyms. Are you all familiar with that? It's a plan that has taken 11 years to complete. It's a humongous amount of work, and one needs to be doggedly vigilant and committed to following the process all the way through. It's a lot of information, and I think possibly a round of applause for the CNPS members in Santa Clara Valley that followed that through. Kevin Bryant is I've been working on this particular plan. This is a plan for the California desert. It's called the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan for only 3 years. But it's all-consuming. And I'm just imagining 9 years, 10 years, 12 years is dizzying. So the plan comes up with different alternatives. We want to build here, then we need to conserve there. These maps show 2 of the alternatives, sort of the extremes. On the left is alternative 1 that says we're only going to build on degraded lands. And degraded is, one person's degraded is another person's high-quality habitat. It really matters who you're talking about, what animal or species. Agricultural lands by some are a write-off, and others is critical habitat for passerine birds, migrating birds, or other animals. So it really matters how you define degraded, but this is the minimum map, as it were. This is alternative 6, which is basically you'll see that they both concentrate development in the western Mojave. This is starting to getting into central, but mostly the western Mojave you see. Down in Imperial County, near the Salton Sea, which is right here. Okay, and here's this is the Chocolate Mountains range, and this is the Algodones Dunes, and this is agricultural land down in here. So again, this is a second focus area for development for projects. And the third, you'll notice, is right here. This is, the buzz phrase is the Riverside East Zone in Riverside County. It's I-10, this is Interstate 10 that runs to Phoenix and beyond. This is Joshua Tree National Park. So the space between Joshua Tree National Park and the city of Blythe along the I-10 is a third zone.
Where is the Ivanpah?
Okay, I'm going to show you that in just a second, but it's right up in here. All right, so without this plan, the status quo is anywhere that's pink and orange in this map is open for development. And that's what we have today. That's what we're operating under today. That's the status quo. It's willy-nilly. We need a coordinated plan. We're not there yet, and it's on a fast track. We've been at it 3 years, Kevin. And the plan is to have a draft EIR EIS by this summer for 23 million acres. There are 347 rare taxa of plants in this area. 1Bs, CRPR 1Bs, 2s, and 4s. About 240 of those are CRPR 2s, and approximately 70 are 1Bs. We started out submitting the entire list of 347 to the technical teams, the agency teams, and you know, one just needs to be ready to be looked at as a fool and be laughed at. You know that. Okay. I learn a lot as I do this. So if I say things you already know, look at me as the rookie. Okay. So the list went down to 65. We did some analysis. And we picked out the 65 most at risk. And so those are now being looked at. The list is about 26 to 36 that they're seriously considering. I don't know if we'll get it to be that many covered under this plan. But that's where it stands now. And then many natural communities, there are plant communities as well. So without the plan, we have anything goes. And what I'd like to do actually here is I'm going to show you now, these are blobs on a map. And I say 23 million acres. The danger is it doesn't look like that much on a map. Unless you've been there and you can give it some relative comparison. So I'm going to take you down to Blythe. Anybody been to Blythe? Right on the border of Arizona and California as you're going to Arizona on I-10. This might be a little dark, I'm sorry. But we're going to zoom in. And what I want to show you here is, well, it is a bit dark, so I don't think we're going to need to...
Turn the lights down.
Turn the lights out.
Okay. The anticipation is great. Okay, so this dark splotch is Blythe. And the Salton Sea is here. The mountains that intersperse in the desert. I'm going to focus on this mountain range here. These are the McCoy Mountains. And here's Blythe. Just to give you an idea of some of these areas that we're focusing on conserving, the wash areas, the creeks. They're desert creeks, they're streams. They're ephemeral, they're dry most of the time, but watch out when they get wet. Okay, so you see the dark blotchy splashes? The dark blotches here are desert pavements, cobbles and gravels that have congealed. They were washed many thousands of years ago from an old Colorado River flood event when it came way over here. The wispy threads are the washes. This is the flat Bahada area like I showed you. This is prime desert solar land. So just keep that in mind. Blythe, McCoy Mountains, and I-10. I'm going to show you a map in a bit with those features. Okay. So what does it look like when you get down here in the ground, on the ground, in this area? I think, here we go. So as you drive along, here we are, okay, let's orient ourselves. So those are the McCoy Mountains. And here's the dark gravels. Interspersed are these washes here. We'll just take a ride for a second. Okay. So there's not much in terms of vegetation unless you're in the washes. And these washes now are down maybe 4 or 5 feet. And you can see that there are these ribbons on the landscape. They provide habitat and dispersal zones for animals and plants in an otherwise harsher upland landscape. Washes are deeply incised the closer you are to mountains. And as you move away, then they become a little more subtle. So you can see how deep this one is. This is closer to the mountain there. And they're beautiful, and it's such a quiet place. So quiet that doesn't translate out into pictures. They can be very subtle. Again, they represent conduits of energy, of gravel, of soil, of seeds. They're habitat zones for burrowing animals. And they're great places to go and explore throughout the desert. Desert washes. So this is what it looks like when you're down on the ground in an area that is prime development for solar plants. There you go. Imagine you're a little fox running down there. And plants know they're opportunistic, right? Look at this. I mean, I don't know how often water would be in this little wisp of a wash, but the plants and the seeds have taken advantage of that. Okay, so that's a little picture of what it is on the ground. Now, that was down here. I'm going to show you one more place. It's up here. This is I-15 from Barstow, heading up to Las Vegas, which is right here. And right at the border, right at the elbow of the 15 highway, where that red box is the Ivanpah project. The first one to be certified in California on one of these big projects, and is now about 2/3 done under construction, and is scheduled to go online later this year. Typical of these projects, this is what we knew about the botany within that box before project surveys. This is what we knew about the rare plants in the area after the surveys. The desert is a largely unsurveyed area. Project after project goes out and does surveys and finds a suite of CRPR 1Bs, 2s, and 4s, and then it becomes CNPS's job to educate the project applicants, their attorneys, and the regulatory staff and directors on why these are important, why they're rare, and how best to avoid them, and if we can't avoid them, then what kind of mitigation is there that's available. On this particular project on Ivanpah, we weren't successful in moving the project, but we were successful in getting this upper third of this box removed from the project because of a wash that came across that was rich in 1B and 2 rare taxa. So, even though we don't know a lot about what's going on, project gets approved and construction begins. All vegetation has to be raised to no more than 18 inches, including 300-year-old Yucca shedidra, which is, after 300 years, removed in an instant. And so this vegetation clearing goes on across the acres, and it makes me personally question the decisions that we're making in the name of saving spaces like this. If we want to build projects to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate climate change for ourselves and for the rest of the environment, then we need to be able to do it without destroying the intact wild spaces that this place represents and other places. We need better choices than this. They're looking for desert tortoise, making sure that that doesn't run it over. Okay, so that's done, and how, this is what I wanted to show you, 4,000 acres. What is 4,000 acres? Here we are in the library. Here's El Monte Road. This is El Camino Real. This is Arrastradero, did I say that right? And this is 280. And 4,000 acres would be that. Imagine that space covered completely with mirrors. And that's a medium-sized project in the desert, the one I just showed you. And here's what it looks like when it starts to be built. So each of these blocks is a little over 1,000 acres. And each of these mirrors is 7 feet by 14 feet on a side. And there are over 100,000 in each unit, over 100,000 mirrors. This particular technology focuses the light onto the black box at the top here, which superheats a salt mixture that becomes molten and creates pressure that is piped to turn the turbine within the electromagnet, and that produces the electrons that go into the wires. Okay, so 3 blocks. And this is the area that I said was taken out of the project. This is the 3rd block under construction now, and this is the Ivanpah project. That's one project in the desert. These projects, spaces like this, turn into this. Places like this turn into things like that to make space for these. The infrastructure for wind projects is where the terrestrial damage comes in, the slicing and dicing of intact, in this case Joshua tree habitat in Kern County in northern Antelope Valley is sliced up to make humongous roads to install the infrastructure for desert wind projects. And I'm being very negative. I feel like I'm just sort of putting out this renewable energy is bad, but that's not it. That's not the message. It's the siting that's bad. And it's the over-reliance on building big that's also a poor planning choice. So, a little bit more. I'm going to focus now on this area over here again. Remember the East Riverside area with Blythe? Just to show you, this is the area with this black box. This is the area that we just took a drive around, and I showed you the washes in that area. That's one project. I was out there in October. Every one of these pink boxes with a letter on it, and the long linear features. The boxes, every box is either a solar project application or a substation, and the long linear features are the transmission lines planned to ferry away the electricity This is Blythe, and every square inch around Blythe, north to south, to the west, has a project plan for it. And then as you go out this way. Each one of those is as big or bigger than the Ivanpah project I just showed you. So it's a massive all-at-once. It's a massive all-at-once impact. And right now it's spotty all over the desert. And those impacts bleed outwards from a project site. Invasives will go out from the project site, no matter how well we wash off people and machines that go in and out of it. Okay, so what's next here? These are the projects that are currently under application as of 2012 in the desert region. Each one of those comes with an EIR or an EIS, and someone's looking at them. They tend to come in bunches of 10 or 12. 11 were approved in 2010, another 9 in 2011, and some 2012 was a bit slower, but BLM just published their priority list for this year, 2013, and there's about almost 24 solar and wind projects on that list. This is, you know, just a placeholder road. Just to finish off these are the types of impacts that are happening in the desert right now. It's a road running miles and miles north and south of that area to the west of Blythe, getting ready for 3 large projects to come in that area. And that's a nice wash with Palo Verde and Ironwood, that one of many that just gets severed by the road as it goes through. So there are impacts to the desert that are a real bummer for plant species and communities. We need to site them differently, and we need other solutions to these huge impacts we're having in the desert. And what's the alternative? There are, I'd say, 3 things that we're working on. You know, the big picture is we need alternatives to carbon-based energy. But scraping aside intact functional ecosystems isn't the way to do it. Not on public land, not private land. We need to put things in areas where we aren't going to be degrading or destroying intact spaces like this. One alternative is to put large projects and medium-sized projects or small projects on already degraded or contaminated lands. The US EPA has come up with a tool that was published at the end of last summer. In California, it identifies through Google Earth mapping 11,000 different sites in California that are degraded landfills, Superfund sites, military areas that could represent places to build solar projects or wind projects. Another part of the puzzle is our behavior. Conserving energy and building machines that are more efficient in energy. And this Energy Commission is making strides, I think, with the efficiency part of that equation. So put things on degraded lands, conserve energy, make energy use more efficient, and thirdly, let's generate the energy where we're using it. Put the solar panels on already built environments. We need more of that. Distributed generation. How do we get that? Well, remember, this is a talk about CNPS, right? So we've strayed quite a bit, but in the last 3 years, in order to prevent impacts, tremendous impacts to species and communities in the desert, we need to advocate for solutions that release the pressure on the desert. And this is one of them. So how do we get that? There are places to start understanding how we grease the wheels for more distributed generation. But in a nutshell, I would say that it's not a technical issue. We don't need new technology before we can start covering everything with solar panels on roofs or parking lots, etc. It's a policy issue and a financial issue. It's a paradigm shift about how we've always done things in this country, and that is in terms of generating energy. And that is building it big, no matter if it's wind, solar, coal, oil, or gas, generating it in big facilities, and shipping it across hundreds of miles of wires. That infrastructure is what we do. And that infrastructure is how utility companies that broker energy, that's how they make a guaranteed rate of return that's how they make their profit. They don't make their profits as much on how much energy they sell, but how much infrastructure they build. That's just the way that it has evolved. And we need to evolve away from that in ways that pay for everyone. So who's doing that? Who's working on pushing that forward? There are 3 places I would point you to. One is on their websites with people behind them. One is Solar Done Right, a website that summarizes many of the impacts that are happening and describes better ways forward and provides rationale behind that. Another is Environment California and their Million Solar Roofs initiative. They advocate distributed generation policy in Sacramento and have information on their website about that, especially about bills that are in play today that might help this happen. And the last is cleancoalition.org. That again, they are advocating policy not just in California but across the nation to generate a market-based solution for businesses that want to put solar on people's rooftops. Okay, so I spend much of my time working on the conservation plan to try and localize the impacts into zones in the desert. In Sacramento, I attend a lot of meetings and coordinate with other organizations, NGOs, to engage in that land use planning process. That's one major thing that the conservation program at CNPS does out of Sacramento. I'm going to switch gears completely now. And I'm going to talk about, in rapid fashion here, I think, what we are doing in terms of legislation this year, part of it. I told you before, we track legislation. If you go to a website, at the state website, you go to the conservation button, there's a tab that says Legislation Tracker. And you go to that, and you click on this link, and you'll get to a page, like I showed you before, that has the bills that we're tracking. Whether we oppose them, we're watching them, we support them. When it's a really tough call, we'll have a committee. We have a legislation committee that discusses what would be our best position. So that's one thing that we do, and we've always done this for years. It's been there. It's just only in the last 4 years, with the conservation director warm body in Sacramento, do we sort of maintain presence now more often in the capital. Excuse me. Now, not just track, but now that we have a little more capacity in Sacramento, we look at improving the tools of conservation through legislation. And this isn't exactly how it happens, but this is how I'd summarize how it happens. We identify inefficiencies and failures in our current tools, and I'm going to give you 2 examples in just a second. We identify who else might be interested in helping change some language and bringing a bill forward. If we have enough support, then we work on drafting legislation, navigating that through the legislature, from January through August. Hopefully we'll get a vote on it, and if it passes, then the work of implementing that can then begin. So, I'm going to give you two examples. One, they both have to do with forestry and harvesting timber from private lands in California. When you do that, you fall under the forest practice rules, big book on what you can and can't do when you harvest for commercial purposes, woody things in California. Well, there were two things recently, two things that we identified as one's an inefficiency and one was failure. The inefficiency is that when someone wants to cut timber and sell it, they have to submit a plan. It's called a timber harvest plan, or a THP. And that plan is reviewed by many different agencies. And the one agency that is responsible for looking at the plant impacts is Department of Fish and Wildlife. Which was Fish and Game, now they're Fish and Wildlife. In 2009, in the early 2000s, the staff statewide reviewing THPs numbered 50 full-time employees at Fish and Game, looking at THPs in every region. In 2009, budget cuts, Governor Schwarzenegger cut 50 positions down to 8. So in effect, and 7 of those were to look at the salmonid issues with timber harvesting, and so there's basically one person left. She worked out of Arcata, looking at the timber harvest botanical issues as often as she could for the state, but really it was just for the North Coast. So clearly, California needed more staff. So the second thing is that, and this is a failure in the current rules, disturbance from timber harvesting has left a legacy of degraded habitat in forests across California. There's so many factors that aren't there anymore. The heterogeneity horizontally of structure in a forest, the understory, quality and quantity, the number of down logs, the number of snags per acre, per watershed, are all deficient for the habitat that live in various bioregions in California's forests. How much of that disturbance is acceptable and how much is too much? We need to define that. We need to establish ecological standards that define what we want our forests to look like on the baseline, so that we all, timber industry, conservation, the regulatory agencies, understand what the outcome of our timber harvesting should be. That way, we may provide more flexibility on how to get to that outcome. But right now, we're looking at plans and approving plans that are shell games that avoid looking at the true cumulative impact of what we're doing. Here's an example. This area in here is one of the 2 giant sequoia groves in Calaveras Big Tree State Park. Surrounding it, ringing it, are swaths of clear cuts. And that's okay under the current forest practice rules. This type of scenario where the encroachment and the fragmentation of the habitat around something as iconic as the giant sequoia groves in Calaveras Big Trees is allowable, is acceptable at this point. So, we're not the, CNPS isn't alone in calling for the establishment of ecological standards. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife has a state wildlife action plan within which, in many places, they call out the need to establish ecological standards for timber harvesting in California. California Department of Fire and Forestry, the CAL FIRE, has a strategy plan for the forest and rangelands in California, where they also recognize the need for ecological standards that should be developed. So, okay, those are the two things. We need more people, we need ecological standards for forests. So what did we do? Last year we worked on a bill, it's called the Timber Tax Bill, where we wanted to establish with other groups the support to find new funding to reestablish positions at DFG. We worked with others, we drafted this language, and how many of you were able to follow this going on as it was happening? Excellent. It was a double-edged sword. Not everybody supported this because along with the new revenue source, which has its own controversies, was a very controversial stipulation in the bill, a provision in the bill, to limit the amount of damage that could be awarded to federal agencies for fires started through negligence by you or me or a company. If they started a fire and it jumped onto a national forest and it burned down thousands of acres of national forest, the feds could sue for damages, and this bill limited how much they could sue for. And that was a very bitter pill for many people. So that's full disclosure on this. It also increased the term of a timber harvest plan from 5 years to 7 years. So we weighed the pros and cons. We navigated it through the legislature and helped find votes to see if we had the votes to get it passed. It did pass. There's now in the new funding source, all wood sold in California, lumber is taxed at Home Depot, 1%. And that funding goes to a variety of things. One is to pay for new staff at agencies, and then after that, for restoration, forest restoration projects. So that work is, we thought was done. The governor's budget proposal that came out last month has in it a line to establish 35 new positions, or reestablish 35 positions at Fish and Wildlife for a timber harvest review, which would bring it up to 43. And I'll just say that the timber industry has pushed back on that, saying that that's too many positions, which is, if you knew the full details, I just have to be candid and say it's a lot of chutzpah on their part, because the tax isn't even coming out of their pockets. I'm not really sure why they have that beef, but they're pushing back, so we're supporting the governor's budget as it is now to reestablish those positions. So that happened last year. This year we have tried very hard over the last month to try and get an ecological standards bill introduced for this session. We drafted language. We looked, the language shows the need for the standards, that we want to establish a process that appoints a science panel to develop standards and to integrate their findings into the California Forest Practice Rules. We support it, of course, because it's our bill. The Resource Agency Council and staff at the Resource Agency see the benefit of it, and we're not in opposition, but they told us we needed to show them that we could come in holding hands with the industry and other NGOs in order to really get this off the ground. I don't know if we're going to get that done this year. I think this year we'll spend time talking to the timber industry and seeing how they would best see this happen. See if we can get them to support it. Other NGOs, oddly enough, are working sort of to get there. They're working on other bills that are forestry related that sort of tighten up existing planning processes. In my mind, it's an incremental step to getting to where we want to go with the bright, shiny outcome defined at the end. These are the standards that we must meet in our performance of timber harvesting. That's what we want at the end, so that there's no disputing when too much damage is happening. And certain practices in certain areas need to stop for a while. Okay, so that's the legislation in forestry that we've been working on. We've also been very busy with CEQA, which I think maybe we can talk about if we have time at the end. I'm not going into it right now. But the work in legislation continues. If we had time, we could talk about CEQA, but I'm really trying to encapsulate some of what's going on. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on right now. With CEQA legislation, with forestry legislation, with the desert solar projects and the desert planning. CAL FIRE has put out a PEIR program, EIR, as some of you know, for how to treat vegetation for fuels management and fire suppression throughout California. That is, what were they working on for 7 years? That's what I have to say. I mean, I understand what they want to do in terms of putting a program umbrella around how vegetation treatment happens and is assessed, impacts assessed, and projects go through. That stuff's going to happen. But we need to have it happen in a way that is more holistic than what is shown in the current plan. And we need to have a plan that makes sense, where the numbers even add up, for goodness sakes. Okay, so I'm going to finish up just by going through quickly, reminding you what most of you already know on what chapters and state do together, the sort of common things we do. I think I've already mentioned most of them. That here we are, we're an organization of 33 chapters, about 9,000 members currently, and a headquarters in Sacramento that does statewide things. One of the things that we all do together is events. I said that before. We get together. I hope some of you have a chance to either attend a chapter council meeting on a quarterly basis. I know some can be travel at times. Or every 3 years, now we're getting together for our super mega CNPS-Palooza conservation conference, where it's a great thing to go to. There's a lot of learning that goes on, a lot of networking. It's one of the best and biggest things I think that we do. These conservation conferences. The last one was in San Diego. And, you know, getting together, spending time together and talking about all things botanical and beyond. And just last, I'll finish with the work that CNPS has done since the beginning is to let others, try to express to others our passion for the botanical hotspots where we live. The things we know about, the things that we care about, we want to protect. And year after year, chapter by chapter, we engage in our local communities and our counties to let people know this is an important thing. This is why it's important. These are the things that these plants and these plant assemblages need to sustain themselves. And by doing so, they will sustain all wildlife and ourselves as we go forward. So that in a nutshell, it's a big nut, are the major things that go on out of Sacramento. in the conservation program at the state office. And, oh, well, look at that, a bonus. Perennial grassland prairie in the Carrizo. That is what goes on. And my number and my email, the email's easy, it's gsuba@cnps.org. That's where I am. And we have monthly conservation calls on the first Tuesday of every month from 10:30 in the morning to noon. Your conservation chair has more information, and you're welcome to call in if you'd like. And I hope that I've maybe told you something about what goes on in Sacramento that you didn't know before, but if not, then thanks for listening this long.